I would like to thank the National Library of Malta for inviting me to give a presentation, an overview, in a series of lectures, as it were, entitled Striking a Chord. Naturally, this series is indicative that it will deal about music. In fact, I was specifically asked to present something on Maestro Joseph Vella. Maestro Vella was born in 1942 and he passed in 2018. He was honourable, magnanimous, a genius. He was loved by many, but admired by all. Celebrating the living, especially when these are no longer with us, is one way of activating memory, of keeping it alive and present, of making sure it will continue to sustain and nurture future generations and future endeavour. This presentation is a tribute, a very small one of course, to one of the island's foremost illustrious citizens, Joseph Vella, a household name, an inspired and inspiring polymath in the multifaceted aspects of his professional life. He was a composer, a conductor. We also remember his pioneering work in the editing and performing of old Maltese music, which earned him, as it were, the title of Father of the Maltese Revival Movement. He was also the first Maltese composer to appreciate the immense riches of the Maltese language, setting George Pisani's Il-Ħaġar to music in a secular cantata. This is Opus 5, a very early work. And this happened in 1961. It was followed by countless songs, as well as setting 4 of his 7 song cycles to Maltese texts. He was also an inspector of music, as they were known in those days, within the education department, and also the founder member of the team that set up the Johann Strauss School of Music in 1972. We won't forget that he was also the first academic who introduced music at tertiary level at St. Michael's College. And in his younger days, there is also his brief foray in the realm of popular music as a cantautore. Well, you name it, he was. My purpose here today is to speak a little bit, superficially of course, on the music of Joseph Vella. And this heading of my first section is one that Joseph Vella himself gave to his first CD, which was recorded and published in Sofia in 1991. It was also the first commercial CD to be published by a Maltese composer of his own works. Since then, till his sudden passing 3.5 years ago, Joseph Vella had recorded no fewer than 28 CDs of his work, apart from 12 others consisting of works he edited from manuscripts extant at the Medina Cathedral archives and elsewhere, not to mention, of course, countless other recordings of his works for wind band. I am, first and foremost, a composer. These are Joseph Vella's words. There is an honesty about Joseph Vella's work that endows it with a permanent validity. His musical language, because language it is, far from constructing enclosed aesthetic worlds, is invested with all the power of temporal process and historical engagement. And by this I mean that, for instance, referring to just 2 of his works, and I'm referring to Lament, Opus 103, which was written in a couple of days on the tragic news of the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers in New York in 2001. And there is also Charlie on My Mind, Opus 144, which again was inspired by yet another terrorist attack, this time on the Charlie Hebdo headquarters in Paris in 2015. We will notice when we listen to these works that the approach to language taken by the composer inscribes the struggle to define and to locate the values that endow man's life with meaning, and to translate these values into temporal and historical reality. With his bigger works, namely his 5 symphonies, his 13 concertos, and his 5 oratorios, Joseph Vella strives to achieve what words alone cannot accomplish. Because at the end of the day, I feel that what really mattered for Joseph Vella was the quality of the sound, the beauty that emerges from that. So basically we can say that what he extracts from music is poetry's musical power of evocation. Joseph Vella has 155 classified opus to his credit, apart from double that amount in unclassified works. For him, chamber music is the heart and soul of the musical experience. In that genre, he has written for every conceivable instrument in every conceivable formation. However, his excellence as a composer is also manifested in his large-scale works, not least the Concerto Grosso, Opus 143, for harp, harpsichord and pianoforte solos, together with a symphony orchestra. So it doesn't get much more imaginative than that. This work was written for the Malta Philharmonic Orchestra, but it was premiered at the University of Delaware in the United States when Maestro Vella was invited as a lecturer there in 2016. At this point, I feel I should say that he was particularly proud, in his understated way, of his Symphony No. 3, Opus 105, entitled The Apocalypse Verses. And because he explicitly kind of spoke about it in a very, very affectionate and passionate terms, I feel I should dwell for a moment on this magnificent work. Maestro Vella had been commissioned by then Archpriest of St. George's Basilica, Monsignor Joseph Farrugia, and the Basilica chapter, to compose a work to celebrate the 1700th year from the martyrdom of St. George. Joseph Vella was not partial to composing an oratorio, which is generally the case here in Malta for such occasions. So, when he conceived of the structure for his symphony, he felt that the leitmotif, that is, the connecting thread, running through the different sections, the different movements of the symphony, could be that of the eventual triumph of good over evil, which of course is so well illustrated and expressed in the story of the life and deeds of the Christian martyrs. However, he was not happy with just that. For him, this idea, the triumph of good over evil, also extended to modern-day heroes, fighting injustice, abuse, repression. So with this in mind, he highlights and crystallizes his intended notion of universality. Worthy of mention, too, is the wonderful range of vocal choral works he wrote. Arguably, he wrote among his most beautiful pieces for the Laudate Pueri choir of St. George's Basilica, with whom he worked very closely for decades, and especially for the 4-part female section of that choir. For them, he also arranged the lovely hymns by Giuseppe Caruana, which of course are set to the poetry of Don Carm Psylla. In turn, this choir is the foremost ambassador of Vella's music, not only including works of his in their concerts, but performing his motets regularly during Sunday Mass every week. So, pausing for reflection, as it were, after listening to these works, which are only representative of a much larger cohort, one realizes that it is the artist, in the sense it is the musician, who presses a relentless kind of quest for intimacy of relationship with the various particular realities of experience. Not with what Wordsworth calls, and I quote, the light that never was on sea or land, but with the concrete actualities of the world, with the unique historical event, with the unrepeatable personal encounters, and with all the rich singularity that belongs to things in their intractable specificity. And this brings me now to a shorter section in which I shall be looking at the question of influence, what inspired Maestro Vella. Art not only reflects the present, but it has at its best an archetypal validity which expresses both the individual creative mind at a given historical moment, so Joseph Vella in his own particular historical environment, but also the mind and history of a race, of a civilization. And the greater the knowledge and awareness of history one has, the more readily the relationships and connections of a given work with the past. This kind of knowledge necessarily excludes notions of influence as dependence, as if the composer can't write unless he is under that influence, so he is dependent on that. But it replaces this idea by elective relationships, natural developments of thoughts, feelings, and social structures, as well as affinities between social historical periods which present similar characteristics. So what do I mean here? In practical terms, Joseph Vella specifically acknowledges the influence of the neoclassicists of the 20th century, what we would call the early modernists, most notably Paul Hindemith and Igor Stravinsky. However, this idea does not mean that he imitates Hindemith and Stravinsky. So to take the example of Hindemith, for instance, Joseph Vella shares some of Hindemith's preoccupations and attitudes, especially towards education. He has affinities with him, and he lives in a society in which the conditions of life were, in some respects, similar to those in which Hindemith had lived. So Joseph Vella finds in these conditions a sensibility caught between two worlds. And this is also Joseph Vella's own sensibility, not only that of those who, like himself, are torn between a simple, albeit meaningful, upbringing and the call to reach out for something bigger than the geographical, intellectual confines his beloved Gozo afforded him. But there is also something much wider, much more universal, and I'm referring to that of his time, the decades of post-World War II, a period disenchanted at the loss of centuries-old values and the irrationality and hedonism of life lived on the verge of cosmic collapse. So in this context, the wider context, influence here means that the neoclassicists helped Vella find a voice for what he wanted to say. So there is no anxiety of influence here, to quote the title of a very, very well-known book by Harold Bloom. On the contrary, rather than dependent, influence makes Joseph Vella independent. What Vella absorbs from his influences are an adherence to form, a superb mastery of counterpoint, and an incredible intuitive impulse towards melodic beauty. This latter quality made him a formidable composer. Vella's language is one highly charged with a harmonic resonance, exquisite melodic beauty, and a certain distancing which makes the reference more universal, less specifically personal. He believed that language, freed of conventional reference, points to the existence of an independent, numinous realm, such as beauty, truth, and other spiritual dimensions. There are several contexts or kinds of attainment which Joseph Vella may have in mind in different scenarios. But notwithstanding these contexts, what emerges through his compositions is a refinement of manners in the classical sense. What Cicero means by urbanitas and civilitas, basically an abhorrence of mediocrity. Behind Vella's endeavor is an aspiration towards sophisticated education and a close acquaintance with the accumulated wisdoms of the past. This made him an exceptional teacher and mentor. But this learning did not take place in a vacuum, because he knew that the arts, without an intellectual and spiritual framework, are vanity. The highest peak he always aimed for, therefore, was the cultured context in its entirety. And he exercised this belief in the educating of all and sundry through his teaching, but also through his conducting. His works are performed worldwide, and his conducting career took him to performances in a few of the world's more prestigious venues. I'll just mention a few. For instance, the Lincoln Center in New York, St. Martin in the Fields in London, the Paris Opera, the Bastille, and so many conservatoires and other institutions. He also conducted leading orchestras, such as the Sofia Philharmonic, the Prometheus Symphony Orchestra of New York, the Goffredo Petrassi of Rome, the National Orchestra of Porto, and countless more. Introducing major choral orchestral works to the public in Malta is only one reason he is remembered for in this area. Premiering Karl Orff's CARMINA BURANA in 1978, of course in Malta, I mean the first time it was heard in Malta in 1978, which was followed a year later by Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Choral Symphony, are only two of the many major works he introduced to a local public which at that time could only dream of listening to such canonical works in a live performance. Other premieres include Bernstein's Chichester Psalms, Mozart's Requiem, Charpentier's and Bruckner's Te Deum, Richard Strauss's Four Last Songs, Stravinsky's Symphony of Psalms, Britain's Ballad of Heroes. A few of these have never been heard since their premiere in Malta, and so many others. However, he wasn't satisfied with offering these one-off occasions. He wanted to give more. And this belief, for a belief it was, led to the collective brainchild, as it were, together with his team, which is the Victoria International Arts Festival. This magnificent project is now looking forward to its 25th edition next year. Conceived of as a running in, as it were, to the Feast of St. George in Victoria, Gozo, VIAF, the Victoria International Arts Festival as it's known, is inspired to transcend the popular boundaries generally associated with the Summer Festa, which we know happens every weekend in Malta. So the festival seeks to give a sobering, robust cultural dimension to a festa. But Maestro Vella was also aware that the inverse is true, that the festa for whom he wrote his magnificent Mass in D, Opus 20, the Laudate Pueri Dominum, Opus 20b, and other compositions inspires the festival. Because he always felt that the festa, that popular thing, is the foundation on which higher values are built. Yes, he believed that the parochial in its meanest, that is in its narrowest sense, can be transcended and can be made the foundation for the impossible and the refined to be built on. And the question that is triggered here is not what is our culture made of, but what is our culture made on. As they say, the devil is in the detail, and the detail here is the preposition. And this brings me to the final section, which is, of course, also very superficial, where I shall be speaking a little bit about what art, culture, beauty can be sort of traced in his works and life. It is not the first time that the approach to high culture as embraced by Joseph Vella has been labelled elitist, and that's perfectly okay. As T.S. Eliot reminds us, complete equality means universal irresponsibility. Ironically, Joseph Vella broke the very myth he was accused of adhering to, namely elitism. He simply never gave up. That just wasn't part of his vocabulary. In an interview given to the Sunday Times of Malta, on the occasion of a concert he conducted at St. John's Co-Cathedral to celebrate his 70th birthday, Joseph Vella said, and I quote, "Culture is not merely the sum of several activities, but an attitude, a way of life," unquote. One can come close to articulating what he understands by culture through phrases such as elegant style, I don't know, class, refinement, an adherence to beauty. And that is the peak that Joseph Vella always aimed for in his projects, whether these concerned his own professional work as a composer, conductor, mentor, whatever. And, of course, the Victoria International Arts Festival, Festival Mediterranea, his beloved La Stella Philharmonic Band, for whom he wrote countless works, ranging from marches to large-scale compositions, and, of course, Astra Theatre, to whom he dedicated himself with humbling generosity, not least in his conducting of no fewer than 62 opera productions since 1978, with world-class performers such as Gena Dimitrova, such as Daniela Dessy, such as, I don't know, Aldo Protti, and many, many more. And all this work he conducted on a voluntary basis. It is also, I think, pertinent to mention that he launched on the world stage our very own Joseph Calleja. When Calleja was just 19 years of age, he was trusted by Maestro Vella to sing the role of Macduff in Verdi's opera, Macbeth, at the Astra Theatre. Last but not least, there is his equally cherished St. George's Basilica, for whom he wrote and to whom he gave, among his best-loved compositions, music that everyone wants. The range of Maestro Vella's vision reached its Olympic height, if I may use that phrase, in the stupendous donation of his life work to Il-Ħaġar Museum, in that same fateful weekend when he joined the panoply of greats in Elysium. He was extremely proud of what turned out to be a unique moment in time, a moment that defeated time in the validity of its purpose. He never rested on his laurels, however. No sooner were the events surrounding the inauguration of the Joseph Vella Music Archive over than he said that he couldn't wait to return, and these are his words, in earnest, to finish working on a big project, and this is his opera. He left the piano score of the first two acts without finishing the last one, the third. He passed away a mere 5 hours after uttering these words. He died looking forward. So within this context, in conclusion, the legacy left to us by Joseph Vella is as profound as it is substantial. His iconic presence represents the termine fisso, to quote Dante. Joseph Vella reasserts artistic, historical and conscious form, adding value to art, to time and to consciousness, placing these things in a pattern deduced from historical culture. Commemorating the past, it impregnates the present with meaning and celebrates the future. For many, he is what Shakespeare calls, and I quote, a muse of fire that would ascend the brightest heaven of invention. In short, he is a gift that keeps on giving.